Now, Hurston's work, Their Eyes Were Auction God, actually comes more so on the tail end of the Harlem Renaissance, or really after the Renaissance has kind of died down, and we're entering to what we might, historically call the Great Depression. But Hurston is an important figure because her works kind of reveal her works and written during that time, although published later, reveal kind of the experiences of Black women that are really important. Another well-known author or writer during that time, of course, is Langston Hughes. I assigned you a couple poems, one of his most famous being Mother to Son, and we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow. Of course, we know there's so much about Langston Hughes. He's probably the most iconic literary figure when we think about the Harlem Renaissance, and his works have been celebrated for decades. One of the interesting things to note with Hughes is that he benefited from patronage. And patronage is really important because it basically was the ways in which white Americans enabled African Americans to be able to do their art without having to worry about basic necessities. So if someone patronizes you, or you are as a patron of the arts, it simply means that they allow that person to continue to do the work of art, expression, writing, painting, etc., through funding. So they provide the resources financially so that the artists can do their art. And so it was a very popular phenomenon during the Harlem Renaissance for Black artists, Black writers to have white patrons. And while this did enable for many Black American artists during that time to be able to do their art, now and even then, I would argue, people kind of questioned or recognized that it was problematic, that the only ways that Black Americans, for the most part, could do their work would be by being supported by a white patron. And so it helped to develop and establish the careers of many writers. However, unfortunately, because they were dispensing the money, they could have some influence or say in the art that was being done. And so that's that tension that exists because the art is essentially subject to the will sometimes of the patron. And so this is one of the kind of unfortunate elements that we see that existed for Black writers. And so if you wanted to be successful, you had to be able to secure the support of someone who was white. Another important and key figure, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois. Some people say Du Bois, but Du Bois said that you pronounce his name Du Bois. Of course, one of the most famous intellectual thinkers that we have from the Harlem Renaissance. And Du Bois authors many critical and quintessential works. The Negro in Art is one in particular, and then he has the Crisis publication that he does. And so he does a great job of kind of looking at the development of Black culture, of Black experiences with a critical lens. And some people celebrate Du Bois for the work that he did. I think in more recent years, there certainly have been questions about not all of the things that he proposed, but some of the things that he proposed as what would be good for Black Americans and Black culture. But of course, he is a thinker that is really supporting the development of thinking and how we see our engagement with politics as Black Americans in society, the things that we should be fighting for in our life and in our world. Countee Cullen is another important African American poet during this time whose works are talking about the experiences of brown people, Black and brown peoples. And so his poetry is making an impact. And he's also talking about the existence of Africa for Black Americans in the United States and what that really means. I've heard it said, and I think I've shared in class, that African Americans are people with no home. Essentially, that means that because we were taken from Africa and Africa continues to exist, we are no longer we are no longer bound to Africa as our home. And then because we are taken to America in chains as slaves, America cannot be our home. So we are a people with no home. And so Cullen is one of the writers that really grapples with the idea that African Americans really have to conceptualize what Africa means in this time, because it does not hold the same significance when we think of the context of home, as it being a safe place that you know well, that you find welcoming, that you reference as your place, your space. And so you have different thinkers that are supporting the idea that we need to go back to Africa. You have Black American leaders like Garvey who are supporting those ideas. And then you have other writers and thinkers who are saying, okay, we need to grapple with this because it is not as simple as going back to Africa.